Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about reading slumps, and the reason this topic is on mind for me is because I am currently coming out of probably the worst reading slump or reading burnout, whatever you want to call it, I have had in my entire reading journey. So in the past couple of weeks I have barely read anything. It has been a struggle to get me to read, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it because I know it's a thing that a lot of people probably have happened to them at some point in their reading journey. And I know this might sound a little serious, like it's just reading, it's just a hobby, you know, it's not that big of a deal to not read as much as you did in the past, or, you know, to change up the amount you're reading. And you are correct on that front, but I do think it is still a fun topic to talk about how you get out of it, maybe what caused it. Like for me, I have a few guesses of what caused it for me, and I do have some strategies to help re-kickstart my want to read. And so, like I said, I do think I am on the upswing now. My reading this past week has been the best reading week I've had in probably 2 months at this point, which is it's a lot, because I'm normally the kind of person who reads at least 1.5 to 2 hours a day, and there were whole weeks where I didn't read at all in the past 2 months or so. So it's been quite a journey for me. And I'm going to define a reading slump here as actually not wanting to read. I know that I can replace my reading time with other hobbies and activities that I have, which is something I have done recently. I know in the summer months, especially for me, I ride a motorcycle, and so when it's nice outside, I get out and do that a lot more, and that does, you know, eat into my reading time. But I'm talking about like actually not wanting to sit down and read. And I don't want to say dreading reading, but just that motivation or want to is just gone when it comes to reading. So that's kind of what I'm defining as my reading slump here. And like I said, it's been a rough couple of like 2 months. It's been bad. So I do have a couple of theories on what I think caused my personal reading slump. I hate to do it, but I do have to put a little bit of blame on Memories of Ice, book 3 of Malazan Book of the Fallen. I have been enjoying this book, but I have been stuck at about the 50% mark for quite a while now. Probably 3 or 4 weeks. I have not wanted to pick that book up. And like I said, not because I'm not enjoying it, because I have been having a good time with that book, but I do think it is a book that asks a lot of the reader. I feel like it wants me to, you know, put my best foot forward when I'm reading it. And just recently, it's just not what I've wanted to do. I feel like I was kind of at a natural like stopping point for it, and I'm not DNFing it. I'm not going to stop reading it. I actually plan, after I finish my current read, to kind of go back to it and see if it either puts me back into a slump or if I can kind of keep pushing into it, because like I said, it's been good. I have been enjoying the story. I'm really starting to, you know, get some footing in the world, but I do have to put a little blame on it because it is such a big, monstrous book that so much is going on. I feel like I read 100 pages in that book, and I feel like the amount of information I've gotten is like a trilogy's worth of a normal fantasy series. So much is happening, and maybe some of that is me like projecting onto the book that it's a struggle because I'm like overthinking it and putting too much onto it, which I'm very open to that idea. But that is one of the reasons why I think I've gone into this slump. I think another thing is I was reading too much of the same stuff, which is easy to do when you mostly read science fiction and fantasy. I just think that I was being drawn to like the same kind of story, or, you know, the same kind of thing over and over again. And it was getting a little repetitive, you know. I think that's something that can happen to a lot of us when we don't move around genres. And that's something that I wanted to be better about this year in general. And I think I have really stayed in the science fiction fantasy lane more than I normally would. And actually, I do think that is partially responsible, because I think even though I wanted to read more outside of those genres this year, I think I've done a worse job of it this year than I have in the past. So that is kind of an interesting conundrum I've put myself in, with just kind of reading the same things over and over again, and just kind of giving that like, oh, here we go again. And instead of being like excited and looking forward to, you know, consuming a new story and getting to know new characters and everything, it's just kind of like, oh, it's the same kind of thing again. Another thing that I think has maybe, you know, contributed to that reading slump is not reading enough great stuff, or just there's just been an interesting mix for me this year of like stuff that is fine, but that hasn't like pushed me the way that I like normally in my reading. It's been a lot of just, it's fine, it's good. There are definitely, you know, high points there. You know, I just read Pet Sematary. Actually, by the time I'm filming this, it's probably almost been a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. So about the time I finished that book is really when this slump started. But I love that book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. But in between those highs have been some lows, and not even just lows, but just some like, this is fine kind of material. And I almost think it's better to have bad reads, because I can look at them and be like, those are bad, or that I didn't enjoy. I don't necessarily want to say they're bad, but like I can look at books and say, well, I didn't enjoy that. Of course, I'm like, it would make me want to look forward to my next read if I was reading something bad. But if you go from like just fine to more just fine and just fine, I don't know, it feels like I don't have that same drive. Obviously, really good stuff, I'm like, oh yes, I want to get that high back. And but if I'm not getting there and I'm just sitting around in the middle, it feels like that maybe has also contributed to it. Not getting enough of the extremes. Everything's just been just so in the middle that some of that is I think affecting my enjoyment of reading and my want to, because I'm not getting the reward that I'm looking for in my reading. And of course, I think this is probably true for most people, but real life gets in the way of wanting to read. I've had some really busy weeks at work, not to get too much into that, but being busy kind of takes some of that want to and effort out of reading as well. And so now let's talk about what I have tried to do to fix it. I don't know if I've been completely successful with this, and once again, I would love to hear your suggestions on what you do to get out of a reading slump after I go through some of the things I have done and normally do in this situation. So first up, I read some short stuff. This is normally one of those things where it can almost be like a palate cleanser, where you read something super short, you get through it super quick, and it's kind of like a reward. You got a whole story done, and it can maybe reset you a little bit. I read a book from Frederick Bachman. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it was a fine story, but it was one of those ones where it was just fine, and it didn't like put me on either of the extremes and like push me towards one way or the other. But I do think in general, reading shorter fiction is something that has helped me in the past. Like I said, it's kind of that jump start to get you going again. It kind of just gets you back into the rhythm without being in overly large commitment, which is always nice, because once again, science fiction and fantasy a lot of times are super long individual books that are also part of super long series. So it can be a very interesting conundrum there. But the short fiction, it's like, get you going, almost like a candy. Here you go, let's go and get moving. And I do think that maybe helped a little bit, not as much as it normally would have. And I think I maybe didn't read enough short stuff. I know last year I read so many short things, novellas, particularly for The Cosmere and The Expanse. There's a bunch of really short stuff in there that kind of kept me moving through in between some of the longer stuff I was reading. Something else that normally works for me is reading something by one of your favorite authors, or somebody who you normally click with their reading. I did that partially with Stephen King, and so I did get Pet Sematary, and that once again was a huge high, but it just still wasn't enough. And that was kind of at the beginning of the slump. It really started after that. I also read like I mentioned, the short story from Frederick Bachman, who is one of my favorite authors. And unfortunately, that one wasn't the same highs I have gotten from Bachman, which is really disappointing when you're going to your favorite author to try to help start your reading again, and it doesn't deliver in the way you want it to. But in the past, I have had good experiences of returning to series. Even last year, when most of my reading was The Cosmere, there were times when I knew I was about to get back to like a Stormlight archive book. In particular, at the time, I was going to get to Words of Radiance, and I knew so many people talked highly of that book, so I was excited to get to it. And Sanderson is one of my favorite authors now at this point. And so getting back to that part of the story was something I was super looking forward to, and it kept that motivation going. So I do see a lot of value reading a favorite author. I think, if there's an author you really click with, it's something that can want you to keep going. Something else that I think can be very helpful is reading something different. And I don't just mean a different genre, though that sometimes does work. I mentioned earlier in the video, I have been reading so heavy sci-fi and fantasy that I do think moving outside of that genre is something good and that could help me, especially moving forward. I think I'm going to be a little bit more cognizant of not just reading the same kind of stuff over and over again. But I also mean graphic novels or manga, whatever you're into. One thing that I did kind of keep reading during this slump was I've been rereading Dragon Ball Z, the manga for that, and that is kind of the one thing that did keep me going a little bit. So maybe that is something that I should look into more. In the past, switching mediums has helped a little bit, not as much as I would like to, but it is still a way to stay engaged in the same kind of hobby, even though it's slightly different. I do know some people who this is like their go-to. Absolutely, they put down novels completely and will read like exclusively manga, and that like makes them want to go back to reading because it gets those, like, I don't want to say creative juices flowing, but basically, it gets them back into the mood to do that hobby through a different medium. And I do think that manga can be a really good way to do that, because you can find one that's like a lot lighter and not as heavy. And I do think you can get through those volumes a lot faster than you can a book. And so it's a really good blend of, you're still getting that reward of finishing something. It's still putting you in the habit of reading and consuming a story in the same kind of way. as a novel would, but in a different format. And I think that can be very helpful. In the same kind of vein of changing genre or the medium you are reading, I do think that if you are an audiobook listener, switching to actually physically reading a book, or if you normally read a physical book, going to audio, kind of mixing your actual novel reading experience up, I think that can also be helpful. That is something I tried this time, and it didn't actually really help. I actually physically read that Frederick Bachman short novella physically, and while it kind of helped, kind of didn't, it was nice to like sit and actually read through a book, and it changed up my, because I'm normally an audiobook person, so it was nice, a nice change of pace to go through and do it. This is something that has worked more for me in the past, where it was normally I would be struggling to read something physically, and I would say, okay, I'm going to go ahead, start up an audiobook and let that take me through, and then I would go back to the novel, and it'd help me keep going. The next thing that has been super helpful in the past, I didn't actually really do it this time, but this is something I should have done, is have somebody else pick your next read. And BookTube can be a great resource for that. Sometimes in the past I would just go through and literally look at people's like TBRs and stuff and see if there was something that they talked about, or wrap-ups, if there was something they were really enthusiastic about. But I would kind of just get a recommendation from somewhere else, not leave it up to me, because sometimes you can just be in such a rut, you feel like no matter what you pick, it's not going to be good. And I would, use BookTube, or somebody just have them recommend you a book and read it, and just let them take some of that pressure off of you. And it might be something that you normally wouldn't pick up yourself, and it can just be such a different experience. Also, there is a little bit of pressure if you ask somebody to recommend you something, and you actually communicate with this person on a regular basis. There's a little bit of pressure to actually finish reading that, which can sometimes help you get going again, getting back into the habit and everything, because that person you got the recommendation from is going to ask you about it. And so there's not pressure in a negative way, but I think there's a little bit of like, somebody took time and effort to like recommend something that they think I would like, and so I want to be able to talk to them about it and that kind of stuff. And I think that can be very helpful. And the last thing that I have used quite extensively sometimes in a reading slump, and I tried it during this one, and maybe that's why it lasted for as long as it did, is because sometimes you just have to embrace it. Go ahead, take a break, don't read for a little bit. It's not the end of the world. It is just a hobby. It is something that I do for fun, and most people do. If you're not in like an academic setting, it'll be fine if you don't read a book this week. I know everyone likes to have, or not everybody, but a lot of people like to have goals, and they want to hit a certain number and everything. It's okay. It'll be fine if you don't. Take a break, do something else. It is something I did do. Like I said, summertime I've been riding my motorcycle a lot. It's been fun. It does help clear your head and everything, getting out and doing other things. And so sometimes just embrace the reading slump, take a break, and you'll feel that pull to want to go back to reading. And that is what you were looking for when you're in a reading slump, that pull, that want to get back to reading. So that is my current experience with my reading slump. I really do think we are on the uphill of the bottom of the valley. It was quite bleak there for a little bit for me personally. I normally read, like I said, quite a bit, and to just not be reading at all was a strange feeling. This is definitely my longest slump, and I'm very hopeful that we're back on track. We'll see. I could go right back into not wanting to read, but like I said, I would love to hear any of your suggestions or your experience with reading slumps down below in the comments. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced the same kind of thing, and maybe you have some better ideas to go ahead and try out. But that's all for me, and as always, have a good one.